Okay, so we've got 14 in, no one in the waiting room to start with. So I'll start with the technical introduction and hand over to Angela, and I'll keep an eye on the waiting room as we're doing it. So welcome to all to this week's 12th. I'll give you a number every week. It's our 12th, one for all. So welcome everybody. We're all here again on Zoom. For those of you who've not used Zoom or you're not familiar with Zoom, we want to get quite a lot of people on here. If you can keep your microphones muted, it does help with background noise and make sure you can hear everybody properly. But if you can have your cameras going, it is great. It's always good to see people's faces. It's excellent for our presenter if they can actually see the faces and the feedback from the people who are on the screen. So don't be shy, get those cameras on. This session today is also being recorded as well. When we go into the speaker session, you won't be recorded as faces, so don't worry if you've not done your hair or you're not looking your best, you're worried about all that kind of stuff. We will just go down to speaker view, but we're recording these sessions because people are getting busier and busier now, and they're not always able to make the session, and so they can go and watch it afterwards if they want to. And again, if you found something particularly interesting in today and you want to go and watch it back, you'll also be able to go and watch it. So with that in mind, I'll keep an eye on the waiting room, Angela.
Okay.
And at the very end, we'll be also running a poll, but I will hand over to you today to do our welcome.
Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I can see a lot of familiar faces, but also I can see some new faces, so welcome to you all. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Angela Peart, and founder of WUN, and we've got Hayley, which you all know, who's just letting you in the room, and she's always in charge of the control room on Zoom. So she let us know if there's anything we need to do and when we need to do it. So always keep your eye out for whether she's waving or shouting at you in some description. And we always go through the, why WUNFORALL? Why are we here? Why are we doing this? And when we first started it, it was when lockdown happened, and we needed a place for everybody to drop into and, feel that we were all still connected as the Women's Utilities Network, and ensure that we were sharing knowledge and hopefully in the same way as we before lockdown, we were giving you something that was helping you develop your career. So hopefully we continue to do that. And if there are any challenges, to help you with them and to openly talk about them, because sometimes we go into breakout rooms to do that. And really it's just a pace for us all to be able to keep connected and talk if we want to. So this week, as you know, we always have somebody to come and share knowledge and to give us some information. And this week, we are joined by Angela Love. Angela is the Director of Future and Markets and Engagement at Elexon. Now, Elexon was one of our first sponsors, and they continue to sponsor one and actually actively support us in everything that we do. By hosting events and all sorts of stuff. So some of you might remember Angela. She spoke last year at one of our events at their offices. She's had a long career in the industry and is an extremely knowledgeable person about lots of things in the industry. But one of the big things that she doesn't know a lot about is a balance and settlement code in electricity. So who better to explain to us the challenges that we're currently going through with settlements because of the of lockdown, and also the impact of demand. So nobody else but Angela Love. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Angela.
I've stopped my share now, Angela, so you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay. Hold on a sec. Hold on a second. I might be knowledgeable about a lot of things, but I have my technology expertise getting strained since working from home, so bear with me. Nice to meet you all virtually, and thanks to Angela and Hayley for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all today. As Angela mentioned, I'm Director of Future Markets and Engagement at Elexon. My job title has recently changed. When I first joined Elexon, I was Director of Strategy and Communications. In the last 2 months, I have taken on the role of the Design Authority at Elexon, which looks at all of the modifications to the Balancing and Settlement Code and what that means from a technical and market perspective. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is the impact that COVID-19 has had on settlement and what it has meant for the companies who are parties to the Balancing and Settlement Code, those being the suppliers, the generators and the network companies in the electricity market. So this is a brief overview of what I'm going to cover this afternoon. I appreciate some of you might not know who Elexon are or what it is that we do, so I'll go into that in a bit of detail at the beginning. And for those that are maybe joining us from the water market, Elexon is the equivalent of Mosul, which is the market operator services company in the water market. So we do all of the settlement like Mosul do for water. I'll then go on to talk about what our response to the pandemic has been, what the biggest issue has been for parties, those that have signed on to the BSC and operate in the market, what the biggest impact to them has been from the lockdown and what we've then been doing to help them. In addition, then I'll cover a little bit of the structural changes to settlement that have resulted from the work that we've carried out, and then also talk about the monitoring that we're putting in place whilst the lockdown arrangements are there. And a little bit about the demand insight. As Angela mentioned, there's been a significant impact on electricity demand because of the lockdown measures that the government have put in place. And then I'll come on to talk about what we're going to do next. So in terms of who Elexon is and what we do, we're the end-to-end code manager, or you could call us the market operator in the electricity market. So we run the Balancing and Settlement Code, which comprises each of these components that are listed in front of you. So in effect, what we do is we receive half-hourly meter readings from meters across the UK, and we look to compare what was generated in the market and then what was used when we look at these meter readings. So we make sure that generators are paid for the electricity that they generate and provide into the market, and the suppliers then pay those generators for the consumption that their customers have used. So the meter readings facilitate that process for us. The settlement period in the electricity market stays open for 14 months. So there are 14 months for supply companies to take meter readings from consumer and business properties to feed into the settlement process, for that then to be determined as to who pays who for what between the generators and the suppliers. As I say, we facilitate all of that process. We process £1.6 billion of funds every year. None of that sits with Elexon. It's really a transfer of money that we carry out rather than we're sitting holding any of that money. One of the key cornerstones of the Balancing and Settlement Code is the performance assurance arrangements, which you'll see there in the second column in the middle. So what that is all about is holding parties to account that they are providing those meter readings to us in a timely fashion and that they are robust and actually reflective of what the customers are using. So the performance assurance arrangements are underpinned by a performance assurance board, which is a group that's chaired by Elexon, but is made up of industry experts to look to see traits within suppliers' performance and any issues with supplier performance that might undermine the settlement arrangements and reduce the accuracy of settlement. So as I say, this is a real cornerstone to the Balancing and Settlement arrangements. So I'll come on to talk about the performance assurance side of things going forward. So in addition to what we do in respect of the Balancing and Settlement Code, we also collect and collate and distribute payments for the CFD, which is the Contract for Difference regime, and the capacity market. So those are two government schemes underpinning the electricity market reform. And we manage those on behalf of a company called the Low Carbon Contracts Company. So the Low Carbon Contract Company was put in place by BASE, and we do the services for them in relation to those two schemes. So in terms of what we've been doing in respect of the pandemic, Elexon are based in London. We're based in Euston Road, albeit I live in Glasgow. And on the 12th of March, we had to leave the office. Overnight, the staff went home, and thankfully they had all taken their laptops home with them, because our office ended up being closed for the day on the 13th for a deep clean, because there had been a case on one of the other floors. So from the 13th of March, we've all been working from home. The executive and myself took the decision on the 15th of March not to return to the office, and subsequent to that, there's obviously been the lockdown. So within that first week of us all working from home, thankfully everything worked well. We have robust business continuity and disaster recovery plans in place. So we were up and running and supporting our customers with BAU, but we started then to engage with our customers to understand what kind of issues they might be facing, or what issues they would foresee them facing if they sustain substantial staff losses through illness. So if, for example, they were depleted in the number of people that they had. So from the 16th of March, the week before the lockdown, we were already engaging with our parties to understand what issues they might be having, or they could foresee having, both from an operational but also financial perspective. So that's been going well. I'll come on to explain what we've done to help the parties in that regard. But what we're now entering into is the phase of what will the new normal look like. So one of the things that we have found is that we are still running a number of the work groups in relation to the Balancing and Settlement Code. And whereas before we would have a number of people in the room and we would have the odd person dialing in the phone, now that we've moved to a virtual environment, it seems to be much more inclusive, and it is also much easier for people to engage, and they're all engaging on the same footing. So we had our largest ever work group a few weeks ago, where 46 people joined a virtual meeting. Now that's unprecedented, and speaking to the other code managers in the electricity and gas market, they're saying the same. So that's one of the things that we're looking at going forward, is how do we continue that momentum that allows smaller parties in the market and those that maybe aren't able to afford to travel to our offices to participate in meetings, be that we continue with fully virtual meetings or look at other technologies. So that's some of the things that we're looking at going forward, as well as that's what we would call the new normal. But in addition, we're conscious of the fact that there might be subsequent lockdowns. So I'll come on to talk to you about the arrangements that we've put in place, that we've future-proofed for the fact that there could be further lockdowns, and then also that there could be regional differences. So ahead of there being regional differences, we'd already recognised that that might be the case. So as I said, I live in Glasgow. In Scotland, we're still in stronger lockdown restrictions than England, and similarly Wales are in stronger restrictions than England as well. So that's one of the things that we'd recognise might happen. So we've catered for that in the arrangements that we've put in place. So what we did moving out of that first week of us working from home and into lockdown was we started to engage with trade bodies to understand what parties were saying to them. There are up to 500 people can be party to the Balancing and Settlement Code. So whilst we have contacts, it's easier in some instances for us to talk to the trade associations. So in this instance, we recognised the generators weren't necessarily going to have big issues, but the supply companies would. So we spoke to Energy UK, who are the main trade association for the electricity generators and suppliers, to understand if from a supplier perspective what issues with settlement there might be. So we'd already written to the parties the first week that we were out of the office to offer our support and our help, and we weren't getting that much feedback because I think a lot of the companies were trying to figure out themselves what they had to do, and they were obviously engaging with Ofgem and with government in respect of some of the issues they were having and what relaxation they would provide. So the things that came back from Energy UK about the supplier issues were that settlement volumes was the biggest ticket. It was basically #1 issue for the supply companies. So how settlement works is it looks at using a mechanism called EACs, which is estimated annual consumptions. Now the EACs look at historical meter readings and say how much kilowatt hours do we think this customer is going to use next year based on what they used last year. So as you'll appreciate, if we're sitting in lockdown and you're looking at an estimated annual consumption reflective of 2019's consumption, it bears absolutely no relation to 2020's consumption when these businesses have closed down. So whilst the companies were seeing a settlement volume based on an EAC from 2019, their revenue was zero. So they were seeing all of the costs in the industry for these customers, but none of the revenue. So that was an unsustainable position for the supply companies, which was something that we had to act on and act on quickly. In addition, as I say here, we're talking about the reduced revenues for those supply companies. In addition, then the performance assurance measures that I mentioned earlier on, we put quite stringent requirements on companies who fail to meet what's called the 97% measure. So when I talked about settlement closing out at 14 months, supply companies have got to get 97%. They've got a rolling forecast of 97% of meter readings to meet that 14-month commitment. So where a supplier falls under that measure, they are put in what I would call special measures. So they're put in what's known as error failure resolution, where their chief executive and members of their management team can be called in front of the performance assurance board to explain why they're not meeting the 97% measure and what they're going to do to try and address the failings that they have. So all of that is quite labour intensive for the companies. In addition, where they're not meeting their 97% requirement, they are also then charged. So there are supplier charges that are applied to those companies to compensate for the fact that they're not doing what they should do in settlement. So again, that's a burden, and it's a financial burden on those companies. So that was the other thing that we recognised as a problem. And then the fourth thing was what we call the credit assessment price. So we charge the companies that £1.6 billion that I talked about. We charge that out over the year to the supply companies to compensate the generators for their generated electricity. What we also then do is on a monthly basis, we require the companies to post what's called credit. So they do that in a number of ways. So in effect, they're giving us a guarantee that when we produce the bill to them the following month, that they will be able to pay it. So for some companies that don't have what's called a credit rating, they will have to post money with us so that there's money on account that can be drawn down to pay the generators. Some of them have credit ratings, which in effect the bank's saying, this guy's a good guy, he can pay, or she can pay. So we have various mechanisms for the credit assessment, so the credit to be posted. What they actually have to post in terms of the financial value is determined by what's called the credit assessment price. The higher that price is, the more credit the supply companies have to post with us. So for us, we recognise the price, it's linked to the electricity price. The price of electricity was falling because demand was falling, and the credit assessment price wasn't falling with it. So that was one of the other things we looked at, was how could we address the credit assessment disparity, if you like, that if we could get the credit assessment price down, then it meant suppliers wouldn't have to post as much cash with us, would mean that they had a higher working capital to cover other issues in their business and other bills and things that they have to pay. So as it says there, as soon as we became aware of those issues, we started to look at what could be done to address them. Settlement's quite a complex process, so it's not something that would be an easy fix. But I'm delighted to say the chaps in the office worked relentlessly to try and solve these issues, in particular the EAC problem, because we recognised, as I said earlier, this had the opportunity to cripple supply companies if we didn't sort that out. So as I say, we worked around the clock to try and solve these issues. So in terms of how we did it, so this is a bit more detail, if you like, of the issues that I've just spoken about. So what we recognised in Elexon was that a lot of the actions that we could progress to get rid of these burdens on the supply companies sat in the realms of the Performance Assurance Board. So as I explained earlier, they're a group that has been set up. They're an established group and sit there month in, month out. It's chaired by Elexon, and it's industry experts, a combination of from the parties and some independent people. So what they did was they looked at accelerating the reduction in the credit assessment price. So that was one of the early kind of quick wins that we did, because that isn't as complex, that if we can link it and update it sooner rather than later, it means the credit that the companies have to post is less. So that was one of the quick wins that we got in place. Then secondly, they looked at what's known as the performance assurance techniques. So I mentioned the error failure resolution plans. There's various other techniques that we carry out to assess whether parties are doing what they should be doing. So some of that includes us sending out our auditors, which is quite an involved visit that looks through processes and talks to teams within suppliers' offices about how they manage their processes. So we looked at delaying all of that, also our assurance checks and technical assurance visits for metering. So a lot of those things we then were able to propose to the Performance Assurance Board that those should be relaxed, and they agreed that they would relax them. So this was to reduce the resource burden on the parties. Then in terms of the EAC, as I say, this was the #1 issue that we identified and was affirmed by Energy UK as being the #1 ticket in town. The supply companies were obviously struggling with the payments that they were going to have to make to us when they weren't getting any revenue in from these businesses. So what we did was we recognised that we have core industry experts within Elexon. A number of them have been there since competition commenced, and when I talked earlier on about the Design Authority, a lot of their guys in the Design Authority fit that bill, that they've been involved in the market since the market arrangements were created, so they've got a really deep understanding of the settlement arrangements. So what we did was we thought, well, we can bat around some ideas about how we believe settlement should change, but what we're not seeing is what does that mean for the parties, because they're billing customers, they've got the customer relationship. So what we did was we decided to convene a small group of industry experts. Some of them are from PAB, but some of them are from outside, and some of them are from the agents. So the agents are the chaps that take the meter readings and provide them to us. So we convened this small group of industry experts on the 1st of April. So hopefully you'll appreciate that's a quick turnaround from going into lockdown on the 23rd of March, speaking to Energy UK that week, us looking at what options might there be, and then convening this group for us to all meet on the 1st of April virtually to say, right, well, these are the things that we're thinking about could work to reduce the EACs. What do you think? So we had, that was probably about a 2-hour, I chaired that meeting, we had about a 2-hour discussion with those experts to see, well, what could we do? And then what we did was we put in place, which I'll come on to, a resolution for the EAC issue. In addition to that, what we have been seeing, and I'll show you this when we come on to the demand, is we've seen a significant change in the way people are using electricity. So what we would typically see is a weekday demand, and then a weekend demand that drops down, and within day during the week we'll have a peak in the morning when people are commuting to work, and we'll have a peak in the evening when people are commuting home, and when they start to make their dinner and things like that and put heating on at home and lights and things. That's totally changed. The profile of electricity demand bears no resemblance to what it did previously, and as I say, I'll come on to that at the end. In addition, we then had another work group of the same experts on the 23rd of April, because by that point we had got over the initial hump of there's an issue, we need to sort it, and we had moved into the situation of, well, we understand there's an issue, there's a lockdown, some businesses are now starting to reopen. So around that time, KFC and B&Q, etc., so non-essential businesses that had been classed originally were now being able to open. So whilst there had been action taken for some of these businesses to reduce the EACs and the costs, it was then getting to the situation that they might start consuming again. So we're having then to look at, well, how do we get sites in and out of lockdown, and then also understanding that there might be further lockdowns in the future. So how would we make sure the arrangements catered for that? In addition, we also looked at introducing a change that allowed 2 seasonal reductions in demand capacity. So capacity is the maximum amount of energy that a site is able to consume, and it links into the use of system and the network capacity. So we also introduced a change there, and then also on a modification proposal. A modification changes the rules. So the BSC is the rule book. A modification we put through was to actually change some of our obligations that we couldn't do during lockdown because of a lack of meter readings, etc., and things with performance assurance. In addition, then the BSC panel. So the BSC panel look at changes to the BSC rulebook and determine whether or not to recommend to Ofgem that those changes should go ahead. And unless it's a housekeeping modification, Ofgem are the ultimate arbiter as to whether the balancing and settlement code rules change. So the BSC recommend things to Ofgem. So what the BSC panel did was that they looked at prioritising work coming to them. So they said that they would have 3 categories of change, where they would look at if it was something that was to mitigate risks against COVID-19, then that would be prioritised over anything else. If it was something that was already in play and had a fixed deadline, that would be the next priority. And then if it was something that had a minimum impact on market participants, and it didn't meet the 2 previous criteria, then it could still be considered, but it would be considered at the back of those other 2 types of proposal. And then everything else was in effect getting deprioritised, because we were conscious that parties had a limited resource, and we wanted to make sure that anything we were putting through was going through because it was crucial, not because we could, or there was some kind of other agenda going on. That we needed to be quite clear, and the panel were focused on that it was only priorities that were being worked on. In addition, we issue quite a lot of consultations. There's a big piece of work going on at the moment that we're working on with Ofgem called Market-Wide Half-Hourly Settlement, which is looking to take meter readings from smart meters at domestic properties and use them to settle electricity going forward. So things like that. There's a lot of projects that we have ongoing where we would be consulting with industry. So what we've tried to do is stagger those or delay them so that market participants aren't overburdened. So kind of moving into what did these look like in practice? So this is the kind of techie bit, as I would call it. So what we agreed was for the EAC was that we would allow suppliers to work with their agents to say what the new estimated annual consumption was that was reflective of what that site was then doing. So if it was a hairdresser's, for example, that had entirely closed, the supplier could then speak to their agent to say, right, well, this is clearly a hairdresser's, it isn't allowed to open. So last year's EAC that suggests it's using, say, 25,000 kilowatt hours is inaccurate. So that the agent would agree with them what value to put in down to 0. So somewhere between that. For the KFC, it might have been, well, the EAC was 70,000 kilowatt hours, but it's now open partially. And it's only, it's only doing collection rather than sit-in. So they would maybe then come up with a different value of, say, 30,000 for that. So all of these BSCPs, so that's the balancing and settlement codes, the code of practice documents, they reflect what needs to be done in that area for that to work. That's in effect what we did. We gave the discretion to the supplier and the agent to come up with new values, but they also have to keep evidence of why they've chosen that value, so that when we send out the audit in future, we can look at that should we determine it necessary. In addition then, the other thing that we allowed was for new consumption estimates, as I just mentioned, for the lockdown period to be put in. And then also to look at new values when the businesses become operational again. So where I described KFC and B&Q, that was quite kind of small scale to start with. But what we recognised is that the lockdown might come in, and it has done, that certain businesses can open whereas others can't. So already this week in England we've seen shops opening, but not hairdressers. Hairdressers don't open till July. So what we tried to do was put that in place, that approach with the agents, so that the supplier could monitor individual types of businesses and change the EAC as these businesses became operational. Similarly, if we get into another lockdown situation and shops, like retail shops that aren't essential, have to close again, then this can just kick back in again, and it's up to PAB when this and the BSCP, when those are operational. So those arrangements are operational at the moment. PAB could decide in August or whenever things start to get back to normal that those aren't operational any longer, or they're only operational in England, or they're, you know, so they do have that regional flexibility as well. In addition, there's been a grace period put in place for what we call the data collector, one of the agents, for 3 months. So they usually undertake site inspections to understand what's happening at a site in respect of metering, and to make sure there's no tampering with meters, for example. So there's been a 3-month leeway given to them to get back to normal once the lockdown finishes. In addition, the other thing that we looked at was what's called long-term vacants. So there are sites that sit in the market that don't have anybody in them. So we've all seen them down the high street, your Woolworths of the world, etc., that have went vacant at some point and they've never reopened. So there's a process to manage those, and people need to go out and visit them. So that's obviously not something that can be done during lockdown. So again, that was one of the other things that we addressed, was the vacant process. So in terms of what we're doing to monitor the situation, because potentially there is the opportunity to misuse this, because if you reduce your EAC, you're reducing your settlement costs, which potentially means if your customer starts using again and you've not put the EAC back up, that everybody else is picking up your settlement cost when you should be. So we have put in a process along with PAB to monitor what's actually happening at a market level, and then also a supplier level. And normally we would be reporting to PAB on a monthly basis, but what we've agreed with them is we're monitoring this on an ongoing basis, and if we see anything abnormal or anything that's of concern, then we will flag that to PAB as soon as we become aware of it. I said that I was going to touch on what's happening with demand in the electricity market. I would draw your attention to the bottom left of the screen. We have put out an Elexon insight document which explains exactly what we've been seeing with demand since lockdown commenced. So you'll see from the top graph, it spans back to 2017, and you'll see the periods highlighted in the colours reflect the lockdown period. So you'll see how significantly reduced demand is in 2020 relative to the previous years before that on the screen. In addition, then we looked at London weekday versus London weekend. So as I mentioned earlier, we've got the opportunity and the ability to look at regions. So there's what's known as GSP groups, grid supply points, which are regions within the UK, where we can drill down to see what's actually happening in each region. So you'll see that the shape of the demand has changed, with weekdays looking more like weekend. So whilst before, weekend would drop off in demand and there would be no peaks. As I said earlier, there's usually a peak in the morning and a peak in the evening. We're not seeing that now during the week. That's obviously going to start to change as businesses start to open up. And then the third thing on the graph there, or on the slide there, sorry, is that you can see from that, it's not very visible on this slide, but if you go to the insight document, you'll see it, that demand's roughly down by a third to what we would normally see. And particularly rush hour has dropped off at both the beginning and the end of the day. And again, that's London. So in the electricity market, everything is monitored by half hour. So the information we get from meters in the non-domestic market is on a half-hourly basis. So again, we've got that granularity to see what's happening. So again, concluding, as lockdown continues, we're continuing to provide that support to BSC parties, and again, looking to see if there's anything else that we can do. Our whole purpose in life is to make the market work. The market works by having market participants and a strong competitive market around that. So it's in our interest to make sure these arrangements work for the market, work for the consumer, and work for the suppliers and generators. So if there's anybody from those companies on the call, if there's anything you think that we've not done that we could be doing, we're more than happy to hear from you, and we'll do whatever we can to help. We're obviously looking at refreshing our market information and those insights to see, well, what's actually happening with demand, in particular as we move out of lockdown. And then the other thing is that we're looking at how do we flex those arrangements that we've put in place in terms of any relaxation or any hotspots that might come forward in the future. So we're kind of looking at this rolling lockdown and relaxation process. So that was me, if anyone's got any questions.
Thanks, Angela. That was brilliant. Anybody, if you want to unmute to ask a question, or if you prefer, you can type it in the chat as well.
Can I just ask a quick question while everybody's thinking about the thing? So we talk about getting back to normal, and I heard somebody say back to better, because what we're trying to do is to make the most of the lessons that we've learned from the changes that we've had to make due to lockdown. There's a mass amount of changes there that you said that you've had to make from a settlements point of view. And there's a lot of changes also for the agents that they're having to make to be able to deal with your customers. Is there anything that you've learned already, just thinking about the back to better, that you would take moving forward that you think would help? You know, any changes that we could make to the BSC?
I think the big change that I've obviously mentioned already is the interaction with the parties. I mean, that's one thing. To go back to us having meetings in our London office, I mean, it's months and months away before we would be able to do that anyway. But one thing, I used to consult in the market and work for a number of the supply companies, and it is very difficult if there's a meeting in the room in London and you phone in, which I used to have to do sometimes. As I say, I'm in Glasgow, and you're very much at a disadvantage. And one thing I think has been amazing is how the virtual meetings have changed the dynamic. Even in our own staff, we usually have a meeting once a month where we update what's happening with the business, but then also with the industry and with government policy. And normally we would get 1 or 2 people asking questions. On one event we had 45 minutes of questions because people were able to type in. So I think even from a confidence perspective, it makes people feel differently. And I think that's definitely something that we've got to learn from, is that keeping everyone on the even footing and giving everybody an equal say is something that we need to try and look to cement into the arrangements, because that's one of the things we've been grappling with as the industry, is smaller suppliers who don't necessarily have the same resources as some of the larger companies, or some of the larger companies used to have. How do we engage them? And I think the videos in particular, because telephone conferences don't work so well because you don't know who's trying to speak, you can't see that emotion, whereas the virtual calls with video are really, really good.
That's great, thank you. Anyone else?
Hi Angela, it's Amma here. Just a very quick question. I know you mentioned that because of like resources, some of the modifications may have to be delayed. Do you see that having an impact on some of the green innovation that some companies are trying to do, like such as modification P379, like with the splitting the meter? That'll open up so much more change, and it's already, I'm already envisioning it. It's going to be delayed anyway, but it's definitely delaying like my product development plans as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've been discussing, and I believe was raised at the BSC panel last week, and it's been talked about before, is how we assess modifications and how eventually Ofgem assess modifications is they look at the applicable objectives. And one of the things that aren't in the applicable objectives is furthering net zero. So there's things in it about, you know, marrying up with Europe, which potentially disappears. It depends on our relationship with Europe. But we could potentially look at net zero as one of the applicable objectives in relation to the mods, in which case they potentially hold more weight. But I share your concern in terms of, it's obviously something that Elexon's been pushing, that we've been trying to work on that. But I think the Build Back Better campaign that is going on, and I noticed Energy UK have been involved in that, the government are now sitting down with us as industry, and we've had lots of discussions with government about how do we sustain the market in the lockdown period. So there is a different relationship with government, and I think between that and Building Back Better, these are the types of things that we need to look at as well. If this is something that helps us build back better, helps us meet the government net zero targets, then they should be getting a priority. So I think it's probably, Amar, I would watch this space, that what can we do to try and push that forward as an industry to say, well, at net zero, we're key to unlocking it, and what can we do as an industry to be able to do that?
Brilliant, thank you. I'm more than happy to help where I can, because yeah.
Contact me on LinkedIn and we can catch up.
Brilliant, sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else? No? That was really good, Angela. Thank you very much. Really informative. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody else did too. So next week, now in lockdown, we're having more and more difficult conversations with people, with our customers, with suppliers, with managers, more than ever before. So we're being joined by a bit of a shift, but we're being joined by Elaine Warwicker from Canny Conversations. Now, Elaine works teams of individuals to have better conversations in the workplace. It's about conversations that are to the point, engaging, challenging, but not confrontational, because it seems that there's a lot of these conversations that need to happen, and it's how do we have them, and we have them in a successful way. And she'll be going through some of the theory of difficult conversations, helping us to understand why they make us feel uncomfortable and how we can plan better to increase the outcome and be successful in those conversations. If that sounds like something that you'd like to learn a little bit more about, come and join us next week. And we've got our two founders on the call today, Angie and Joe. Is there anything you'd like to contribute to that at all?
Not from me. That was great. Thank you, Angela.
Yes.
Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, similarly, hi Angela, love that is. There's too many Angelas, as I've always said, but no, it was brilliant. I find it fascinating hearing the complexity that we're dealing with right now, and the way that things are shifting, and obviously you explained it very simply, which I'm sure it's not quite that simple. So it's brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Angela. It was really good. And obviously, thank you to Hayley, who always does an amazing job every week to keep us all in time and going and making everything work. So hopefully we'll see you all next week, and have a great week. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye, guys.